That's right. It's the Nintendo Switch 2. Jumping on the bandwagon here, I love handheld gaming in every form, whether it's retro emulation, PC handhelds, and yes, also first-party handheld gaming. Kind of exciting because this is the first true handheld device we've seen from a first-party company basically since the Switch 1. If you count the PS Portal, but really that doesn't play anything natively, so always cool to see first-party stuff and get that kind of seamless console experience. Let's take a look. I want to talk about my first 24 hours with the Switch 2 here, my initial impressions. If you haven't already bought one, recommendations on whether maybe you should pick it up or not, and just kind of my feelings overall about the console. This is not an in-depth review, just my personal thoughts on this device. And I just want to start off with one big highlight, which is these new joysticks. Yes, they do feel a lot better than a Switch stick. This cap is significantly larger. Well, I say significantly, maybe that's an exaggeration, but it is larger, it is grippier, and it still doesn't have quite a large controller full range, but it is a nice and welcome improvement. I actually don't necessarily feel like I need to use toppers on this. And in fact, let me show you real quick. Switch toppers don't really fit, and kind of Steam Deck ones do, so it does kind of show how much bigger these are, and I'll just pull that out real quick. All right, so here we have Switch topper, Steam Deck topper. I'm not sure this might fit an Xbox controller as well, so I'm just gonna stretch that over here real quick. Actually, let me just take this Joy-Con off because you can do that. So you can see here the Switch one is a little stretched out. It might slip off. It does fit, but it's definitely holding on for its dear life a little bit. Do you need these toppers? Probably not, but hey, why not show you that? And then here, let's put on the Steam Deck sized one. Normally on a regular Switch, these would move around a whole lot, but here you can actually see that it fits just fine. Now, I will note that this kind of gets in the way of hitting the B button because of just how large it is. Depends on how you grip the controller. But yeah, that just kind of goes to show how much bigger the controller's gotten. Unfortunately, I don't have an original Joy-Con on me to show, but yeah, cool to see that. So that's my first pro, and one of the first things I noticed picking up the Switch. And of course, there's that magnetic locking, which, by the way, don't put a finger here when you lock it. I think it's, I don't know if it's still there. Let's focus here. There's a tiny red dot in the center of my thumb from a blood blister when I first got this, trying to put it back on, and I got my thumb pinched in there because I am not the most graceful person on the planet. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. Right after talking about the joysticks, let's talk about just how it feels in the hand and just kind of look at the device. So, it's still a slab. Nothing has changed here really since the original Switch. It is thin. We do have a little bit more of kind of a bump thing here on the Joy-Con for a little bit bigger trigger, but overall it's kind of that Switch experience. And it isn't super light. It is, I think, 523, 524 grams, somewhere in that ballpark. And you can feel the weight. It's not like super heavy, but since it is big and kind of heavy, you do feel a little bit, and it makes it a little bit harder to support it upright without it slipping out of your hands, especially since there's not a ton of grip to this. So we'll talk more about that a little bit in a moment here as far as the ergonomics and the grips go. I will say that the buttons and the triggers and everything feel nice. I just wish there was more grip on the back. And I get it, it's a Switch, that's the point. It's slim, it's portable. But I think this is a console that you're definitely going to need to get a grip for. Get a grip, dude. But anyways, in terms of the build quality, the plastics, the metals, everything feels nice. We've got the real nice full-size kickstand here, which, yep, just quickly prop it up, no issues. I do appreciate having the kickstand there. And then you can actually see my micro SD express card is hidden behind the kickstand here. That's where you put it in. Took me a while to figure that out because I'm stubborn and don't read manuals. And of course, we've got the traditional USB port on the bottom by the speakers here. But now we get the USB port on the top, which is definitely a welcome addition to be able to have it plugged in and on a tabletop and not worrying about that port on the bottom. Game card slot still over here, power, volume, fan exhaust, I believe microphone here, all the regular goodies. So yeah, it's well designed, feels nice in the hands. Nintendo knows what they're doing, but I think it is going to need a grip. So let me show one real quick, but we'll have more on that topic coming. I'm leaving for vacation tomorrow, so I wanted to have at least something to protect the Switch 2 while I was on the go. So I bought the Savage Raven by Skull & Co. I guess that's their new Switch 2 branding, Savage Raven stand grip. So as you can see here, we do get a bit of extra grip there, a nice rubberized texture. I don't really love that this grip blocks the kickstand. It does stand on its own, but it's not the most stable. It's pretty easy to tip the console over. Also, the grips go straight up and down. They don't flare out, so it's not the perfect grip experience. This does increase the ergonomics quite a bit. There is a bit of a weight penalty, though, and let's just show that off real quick here. This is saying 662 grams right now. Take the grip off, and we've got our naked Switch at 534 grams. I think I misquoted the weight a little bit earlier. Make sure my scale is accurate. Yeah, so you're adding like 130 grams to the weight. It's not the best, but I think the grip is worth it. Speaking of grips, I have ordered, including this one here, 11 grips off of Amazon because I'm not the smartest man on the planet, but I want to go over some grips and tell you guys what the best one is. So real quick reminder to subscribe to the channel so that in a couple weeks here when I get that video out, hopefully next week, you can get some information on which grips you should buy for your Switch. I'm going to cover 11 different ones and rank them on various things, so trying to do that work so you don't have to. Another thing that I really like about the new Switch is the HD rumble. It has a real nice, almost like haptic texture to it. A lot of games really use it and it feels really good. It's not like an Xbox controller where it's rumbling your whole hand because you're going over a dirt road or something, but that extra fine tune of that HD rumble 2 really kind of gives you detailed feedback, and I really found it immersive in games I was playing. I switched back and forth between using this Joy-Cons and using other third-party controllers, which we'll talk about in a moment, and I do like the big rumble also, but the HD rumble is probably even better than ever before, so I really appreciate that. You know, Nintendo knows how to make hardware, so the speakers are nice on here. Let's see if we can pop those on real quick. They might not be the loudest speakers I've ever heard, but they are pretty clear and detailed and do a pretty good job at the lower frequencies, so I appreciate them. Some people might wish that they get louder if you're playing in a noisy environment, but for me at home, the speakers get the job done just fine. Now, as far as those other control options besides just the stock Joy-Cons attached, it does, of course, come with the little controller grip thing here, which has the magnetic attachments to pop those on and off. No charging or anything like that. You do have to pay extra for that grip. And I found that the experience with this was okay and works in a pinch, but not as good as a dedicated controller. Unfortunately, the Pro 2 Switch controller was out of stock at Best Buy when I went to pick up my Switch, which, oh yeah, by the way, I paid all my personal money for the Switch. I'm nowhere near big enough for Nintendo to even know who I am, so unbiased opinions here. I paid for this, no compensation, etc., etc. That part out of the way. There are some third-party controllers that do work. So it turns out that most of my Gamesir controllers work with the Switch, so I'll show you that real quick. That it has, oops, gotta turn the button on the back here. Boot it up, I've already paired it, so it should connect no problem. And yep, there you go. Controller working without issue. But there is one issue I noted with the Gamesir and potentially other third-party controllers, which is if I go into the controller screen and I want to change the order because I've got the Joy-Cons and this paired. I had some games where when this was the second controller instead of the first, it didn't recognize it. So I'm going to change grip order. Now watch this light on the Gamesir when I press that button. Disconnect. So unfortunately, when you try to change the grip order, it totally disconnects the third-party controller. So that's kind of weird. So I got to back out of here and then hit the button again and it will pair up. Should work again. Kind of curious behavior. So just keep an eye out for that. But if you own something like the Gamesir Supernova, which this is here, excellent controller, it works great. And in fact, this one has the ability to pop the front faceplate off and switch these over to the Nintendo button layout, which I did, which makes it kind of nice so that I don't have to guess at which buttons I'm pressing. This is an awesome controller. I use it for both my PC and now the Switch. This is what I've been playing Mario Kart World on when I've been playing on the TV. Great rumble. It's not the HD2 rumble like the native Switch accessories have, but it's good rumble nonetheless. In fact, I had to turn it down because it was too powerful, so definitely recommend the Gamesir Supernova as a Switch 2 companion as long as you're aware of that issue that it'll disconnect if you try to reorder the controllers. Another controller I have that I was excited to try with the Switch 2 was the 8BitDo Ultimate 2, but at the time the Switch launched, this did not pair with the Switch 2, but I believe there have been some firmware updates from 8BitDo to try that out. Haven't gone down that path yet. They are still beta firmware updates, but yes, hopefully we will get updates soon to make this controller compatible right out of the box with the Switch 2. And yeah, so you may have to wait on your favorite controller to get a firmware update in order for it to work with the Switch 2 if it has a Nintendo mode. So just be aware of that. And then the third controller that I did try out with the Switch 2 was the G8 Plus, because this is an alternate option for both docked and handheld mode. And let me show that off to you real quick here. I'm actually going to turn these off so they don't interfere with the controller order. And then we'll pop this into the Gamesir G8 Plus here, which will turn it on and it should pair right up. And there you go. Now this is obviously a much more ergonomic option than the Switch 2 controller. And I would just recommend this. However, there's the small catch that it does make it significantly heavier. So if weight doesn't bother you, this might be a great way to play the Switch 2 and have real comfortable full-size joystick motion, etc. You know, it attaches nice and secure. I don't have any concerns about the Switch falling out. I did kind of wonder about those pogo pins for the controllers, but I don't think the pads make contact with that. And I bet you some ingenious person in the 3D printing community will come up with some plug you can put there. Maybe I'll even design one myself. But yeah, it works pretty well. It feels pretty balanced, especially if you kind of push the Switch 2 up just a hair like I have it here. And it feels good in the hand. It's just heavy. Let me show you how much that weighs real quick here. So you can see here 714 grams. I mean, that's as much as like a Windows handheld, something like the Ally X, Steam Deck. You know, we're now in that territory of weight. So if those things are too heavy for you, then this might be too heavy for you. If you don't mind those devices with a similar weight to this, then this is a great way to play Switch 2. I did play it for a little bit this morning using this controller and it felt good overall, other than the weight, which depending on how you hold it, might not be an issue. Okay, so now that we've gone over those things, a quick note, the screen. There's been sort of, I don't know if you want to call it controversy, but a lot of varying opinions in the first 24 hours here about the screen on the Switch 2. There are some news outlets that measured it and said it's not the best screen in the world. You know, there's some people that have complained about it. But you know what? I'm going to be level set with you. This screen, it's fine. Yes, the motion clarity on it is not perfect. You can see very slight ghosting in some scenarios, but it's not something that I ever thought, oh, wow, this is annoying me while I'm playing the game. The colors are relatively vivid. It gets bright enough, at least for indoor use. It's not the brightest panel in the world, that is true. But overall, I mean, I can't complain too much about this. I mean, we're getting 1080p 60 in a lot of Switch 2 titles, which looks really good. This panel can go up to 120, though I'm not sure how many games will support that, but I believe it's variable refresh rate, so that should smooth out any inconsistencies. So yeah, when I'm just driving around here with Mario, and actually maybe this looks a tad washed out. Let me adjust my brightness here for you all on the camera. So, I mean, it's a good looking display. What can I tell you? It's fine. The motion clarity, maybe in some aggressive scenario would be bad, but you know, it kind of just adds a, I guess you could say a nice motion blur. It's not ugly the way it handles the motion. So like overall, I don't know. You could nitpick the screen and say it's not great. You know, of course it's not OLED. You're not getting the contrast. But for at least for Switch 2 titles, it's very crisp, it's very clear. I don't have any issues with it. I don't know. I think some people just want to nitpick things on the internet. Yes, I guess they should have delivered a better display. Yes, it would have been nice to have OLED. Yeah, they're probably going to extort us for more money later with an OLED version of the handheld. But you know what? I'll probably pay it because I'm dumb like that. Overall, though, the handling of the screen is nice. It feels good to play handheld. I didn't have any complaints, so, you know, your mileage may vary. I'm picky about screens. You know, there are some screens that I don't like. You can see there when I power slided that there's a little bit of blur. I mean, if I go back and forth here, you can see that road in the distance. Yeah, I mean, it's got like a hair of blur to it, but mostly that's... Actually, you know what? Some of that's just the camera picking it up, but there's a little bit of that present in real life. So... yeah, I don't know. The screen's fine, guys. It's no kid is ever going to be like, oh, the screen motion blur and color saturation isn't good enough for me to play Mario Kart. I'm so busy looking at all the cool details on the karts and the awesome tracks in Mario Kart World that I'm not honestly thinking about that kind of thing. And another thing that has impressed me about the Switch 2 is that I've ended up using docked mode a lot more than I thought I would. I'm primarily a handheld gamer. I got a little kid at home. I sit at a desk for my job during the day, so I'm not really interested in sitting at the computer and gaming a whole lot after hours. So relaxing on the couch and playing handheld is the way I unwind a lot at the end of the day. And sometimes I'll play on the TV, but most of the times I'll just play handheld. But man, the docked experience is pretty awesome with this. We get 4K 60 output. Now, not every game is going to output at that. I think Mario Kart World outputs at 1440p 60 when on the TV. But honestly, unless your nose is right up against the TV, you probably won't really notice the difference between 1440p and 4K unless you're looking very closely at the details. And let me tell you, playing Mario Kart World with the chaotic 24-player races and tracks with all sorts of cool stuff and vivid colors on the big screen was totally a treat. So I plan on playing docked a lot with this handheld, which is actually one of the reasons I may return this Skull & Co. stand grip, is because you can't dock with it on. I didn't think that was going to bother me, but it kind of does. So again, stay tuned for my review of 11 cases to see which ones work with the dock and which do not. Before we take a look at a few games and talk about our final thoughts, I wanted to say that the battery life is a big question mark still. Some people have said that it's not very good for a handheld device. You know, we are pushing a lot more power than the Switch 1, and it's still a relatively small battery in here. So unfortunately, it's not maybe going to win some marathon endurance races. I don't want to put out any hard numbers really because I haven't had enough time to test it with just 24 hours. But I did a quick test this morning. I booted up Fantasy Life I and checked the battery, and it was at 99%. I played it until the battery meter read 89%, and that took about 16 minutes. So doing some napkin math, 160 minutes or 2 hours and 40 minutes of estimated battery life. It's probably actually a little less than that because you might not play it until exactly 0% battery. So let's just say between 2 and 2.5 hours. That's not exactly a marathon journey battery, and this may or may not be the most demanding game from the Switch. Again, I don't have a ton of battery life testing, so probably wait for other reviewers with more time on their hands than me to do super in-depth battery reviewing. But let's just say that it's probably not going to wow you, but it's probably going to get the job done unless you are planning to play 6 hours straight, not near an outlet. In that case, maybe there's some indie or lower power draw games for this, but this might not be the marathon handheld to get. So before we do our closing thoughts, let's look at a few games, and let's start right here with Fantasy Life I. This is a title that released for Switch 1 and some other platforms, but got a Switch 2 upgrade, which was paid, but it was like $2 or $3, some minuscule amount. I think I paid 62 something for this game to get the Switch 2 edition, and this game does look nice and crisp on the screen. I don't have any complaints about the visual fidelity. It is overall sharp and looks nice and clear, runs at a good frame rate. Don't know exactly. If I had to guess, I would probably say that it's running at 60 frames per second based on how clear and fluid it feels. It's definitely not running at 30 because I would know if that was the case. And the resolution looks to be close to native, if not native, when handheld. So 1080p 60 handheld, it's a big change. That's one big change from the Switch 1. You might say that this is just sort of like a Switch 1.5, Switch 1 Plus, Switch 1 Pro, that kind of stuff. And in some ways it kind of is, but 8 inches 1080p 60 does look a lot crisper when it works. And that kind of just comes down to the game availability, which is one of the Achilles heels right now of this game, which is we don't have a ton of first-party Switch 2 native titles for this yet. So yeah, that is one thing that holds it back. Another Switch 1 upgrade game that I picked up for this is No Man's Sky. I actually already own this on PC and actually PS4. I don't have a PS4 anymore, but I did buy this on launch when it was not a great game yet. But man, the No Man's Sky developers just keep on updating. This game has gotten probably more post-launch free updates and massive upgrades than any other game in the history of gaming. They just won't stop, which is a good thing. There's a lot to do in No Man's Sky on any platform. So anyways, I digress. I had this on PC and I wasn't planning on buying it again for Switch. It was on sale for $25 and I was like, well, that's not a bad deal, but do I want to play this game all over again? Well, then I found out that No Man's Sky does in fact support cloud save, has for a little while now, but I'm a little late to the game on that one. And yeah, so I said, you know what, let's pick it up, let's play it. I can continue my save on the Switch 2. I can do stuff. And I haven't played this game a lot, but I will say that I'm mildly disappointed in the purchase. The game is awesome. They've updated it. It runs better on the Switch 2. There's no doubts there. but we're still oftentimes looking at like this 30 or 40 FPS frame rate, which if you're used to it and it's the only thing you've been playing, it's fine. But when I just came off Mario Kart World running at smooth 60-ish frames per second, bumping down to the 30 or 40 on here does feel a little jarring. I don't know if you can see that, but it's like, it's not the most smooth looking panning ever. So let's do just like a slow pan here. There's some micro stutters in there as I go, which just do kind of make it feel gross. I need to give this title a little bit more time, but I am not particularly impressed with the frame rate. And maybe I'm being too picky. Maybe I'm spoiled because I do lots of PC gaming at high refresh, and I should just be thankful that we get No Man's Sky in this format. But, before you buy No Man's Sky on the Switch 2, just be warned that if you prefer games that run at 60 frames per second and a smoother rate, that this might not be the one for you. Anyways, I don't want to talk too much more about that. So let's talk about the big star of the game here today. Of course, the launch title, the main Switch 2 title that we have so far, considering there's not a whole lot of actual new Switch 2 only exclusives, and it's Mario Kart World. Came in the bundle with this when I got it, and man, you know what? This is a fun game. I do wish that the world part was a little bit better. You kind of drive in between tracks on some online races, and you can do a free roam, but it doesn't feel super worldy, I guess. But I will say that the environments are awesome, and we've got some really good looking tracks. There's just the details, there's reflections, there's lighting, there's cool stuff, there's transparent stuff. These tracks oftentimes will have a straight section followed by a section with laps. They really stepped up, I think, the level design a little bit on here. As you can see, I've beaten 3 of the cups at 50cc so far. I've heard that at 150cc the difficulty really ramps up, and even good players are having a hard time, so maybe I'll never beat the 50cc cups because I am sort of a filthy casual when it comes to games. But here's just a quick sample of me playing one of the tracks here. It's fun. It's a nice launch title. But if you don't want to play Mario Kart, you don't want to only play Mario Kart, then maybe that's a wait and buy on the Nintendo Switch 2. It does seem that stock is better than people had feared. Pardon me not being able to drive and play at the same time here. So it may not be as hard to pick up later on as we thought. So that's kind of really all I had today. That's my first 24 hours with the Switch 2 and how I feel about it. It's cool. It is sort of an incremental upgrade. It has some ergonomic challenges, but improved controls over the Switch 1. But I think the biggest thing holding it back, which a lot of people may have already commented on, is just lack of launch titles. We've got Hitman and we've got Cyberpunk 2077 and these other games that are getting re-releases on the Switch 2, but if you've already played those games and you're not interested in replaying them, that doesn't really do anything for you. I've put, 70 or 80 hours of Cyberpunk in on the PC, and I'm not really interested in playing it on the Switch at this point. So cool that it exists and you haven't played Cyberpunk, definitely pick it up if you're going to be a Switch 2 person and don't have another way to play that game. Definitely would recommend trying that out. But right now, Mario Kart World is like the main launch title. We do have games like Fantasy Life, Civ 7, etc. that have Switch 2 upgrades. And then, of course, I almost forgot to mention the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom upgrades. But if you're like me, you've already played and beaten both of those games and don't really have an interest in replaying them right now, then I guess that isn't really a selling point for me. I'm not going to go back and play a couple hundred hours of those games again after I beat them not that long ago. Now, some people like to replay their games over and over again. So if you're that person, I've heard that they look amazing. So yeah, definitely get it for that. So if you're like me though, it's like Mario Kart and Fantasy Life and maybe a couple other titles are really the only like Switch 2 quality titles that you can play right now. It is a little bit bland in that regards that there's not more to play. We've got Donkey Kong and other things coming out over the next few months. So it might be a wait to buy if you don't really want to spend a couple months playing Mario Kart World. I mean, it's not like the console is going to get any cheaper anytime soon. So if you want one, and you want to play Mario Kart World and you're okay waiting for other titles and maybe setting this down for a month after you have gotten your content's worth out of Mario Kart, then sure, go ahead and buy it. We do have stock, it seems like. I have heard of people just walking into Target and GameStop the last couple days and just buying one without a pre-order reservation. We'll see how long that lasts and whether Nintendo continues to get stock into the US. But right now they seem to be fairly available. I waited in line on Wednesday night since I'm on the West Coast here for too long to pick up my pre-order, and it was hardly worth it because I could have just walked into Walmart the next day and bought one. You know what? But it gave me a few hours head start. And yeah, that's really all I got to say about the Switch 2 today. It's a cool piece of hardware. It's an incremental upgrade. There's some really cool quality of life stuff. We got the nicer screen. We got the nicer controls. But we still remain to be seen on support of more titles. Are we going to get more patches, either paid or free, to Switch 1 games to unlock 1080p 60? Because I didn't mention it earlier, but Switch 1 games are still going to run at 720p on this 1080p display when they don't have any patches to change that. So unfortunately, that will actually make it look a little grainier since that's being stretched up. So unpatched Switch 1 games are not necessarily the best experience on here, but games that have had free or paid upgrades are a much better experience on the Switch 2 than the Switch 1 in terms of performance across the board from what I have seen and experienced myself. If you have any questions that you're dying to know about the Switch 2, drop them in the comments below. I'll do my best to read and answer those and potentially do a follow-up video. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to do a big shootout, 11 different grips that I bought from Amazon with my own money. So please watch that video and support me. And we're going to find out what grip is the best for each use case so that you don't have to do what I did and buy them all. Anyways, that's it. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy playing your Switch 2 if you have one, and I will catch you next time.